Hey there, it's Annette, Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be making a bird. This is my July bird of the month and it's called a Wilson's Plover. I first saw this bird down in Florida just last year, so I'm pretty excited to do a pattern of this bird and share it with you. And I'll make sure and leave a link to my Etsy shop and to this pattern in the description of this video. All right, let's talk about the pattern. Here's page 1, and it just has the title, the date, the bird, which is a Wilson's Plover, and the image of the pattern. These are the 5 colors I'm choosing. There's a peach, a black, a white, a dark brown, and a sandy, light gray, light tan color. You can choose any color you want to. The next page of this pattern is sections. And they're labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and the instructions, for example, to make the top of this pattern, which here's the top divider and the bottom is over here, top over there. You would put A and B together, then you would add C, then you would put D and E together, then add F, then add G, then you would put those two together, and that is how we would finish this block. The next 8 pages, I've got 4 pages of pattern with the letters and numbers and 4 pages without. When doing this eye section, it's a little bit easier to see it without the numbers. As you can see on that D section, those numbers get a little crammed in there, and that's just the way EQ8 does the pattern. So I like to print one out without numbers so that it's easy to see what goes where. Here's a look at the 5 fabrics I chose for my bird. First on my list is cutting apart the pattern pieces. Now while I was cutting these out, I made sure and set aside the ones that I want to do without the numbers, which is, for me, it was D and L were the main ones. I wanted to use the piece without the numbers because they were crammed in a little bit too much. So my next step in doing a paper piece pattern is to cut out the pieces of fabric that I need while I'm looking at the picture, looking at the sections, making sure what color I'm going to need for that piece. And one tip to remember when you are matching up some fabric size to the pattern, to make sure you have enough, leave yourself a generous seam allowance. I probably do at least a 1/2 inch to 1 inch bigger than what I actually need, just so I have wiggle room. And when you're looking at the pattern piece, the printed side that's up is actually, if you're matching up to that side, you want to be looking at the wrong side of your fabric, because the right side of the fabric is going to be on the back of that piece of paper. And you can see what I'm talking about real well with this brown fabric, because the back side of the fabric, the wrong side, is a very light color. So I am matching that up with the wrong side of that brown up and cutting around the outside of where that piece is going to go on that pattern piece. The next pieces for this section, I'm cutting out of this beige fabric, which actually is a batik, so there is no right or wrong side. That made it a lot easier. I continued cutting out the fabrics for each section, and individually I stacked those up, and at the end I have a stack of sections and the fabrics ready to go. And here's your friendly reminder to set your stitch length to 1.8 or less. All right, we're going to go slowly through this eye section. And I'm referring back to the piece with the numbers, as well as just knowing that the first piece is the interior of the eye, the black pupil, and then I'm going to need to match that right sides together with a piece of the brown, which is spot 2 on this piece. I'm going to be sewing on the line between piece 1 and 2, and I want to make sure that that edge of those two fabrics overlaps that stitch line so that I have a seam allowance. Once I have that in a good spot, I stitch the line between piece 1 and 2. I stitch 2 to 3 stitches ahead of the line, ahead of where they join, and a couple or 3 stitches after as well. After trimming the excess thread, I fold the paper back on the seam line and I trim close to that seam line, at least 1/4 of an inch, to get rid of any excess bulk. Then I press that seam open. Next, we're going to add piece 3. I'm going to hold piece 3 right side together to the back, and then I'm going to fold down on that little stitch line between 2 and 3 to make sure that my brown fabric is going to overlap that, so I'm stitching where I should be stitching. And I need at least 1/4 of an inch over that stitch line visible. Then I'll feel comfortable about taking that to the machine and stitching that line. And after I add each piece, I trim excess thread. I fold the paper back on the seam line, trim away any excess bulk, and last I press the seam open. Now it's time to add piece 4. In this case, piece 4 was pretty tiny, so I decided to fold back on that stitch line, or very close to it, and go ahead and trim that excess bulk away, and that way I would be able to see a little bit better where my piece 4 needs to go. And again, we stitch the seam, trim away excess threads, fold the paper down on the stitch line, trim excess bulk away, and then take it to the iron and press that seam open. I skipped ahead a little bit here because I want you to see how important it is to have a bright light. If you have a bright enough light, you can see through the paper and see exactly where your fabric is going to be, so you know you're going to sew in the right spot. Alright, I skipped ahead to the very last piece on this section, which is one of those beige fabrics. And this type of paper piecing a light fabric is a little bit of an advantage because you can see it very well through the paper. I'm going to go ahead and flip this around and trim the paper, and I am cutting on that dotted line because that is my seam allowance. And that is one section all finished. It's kind of fun when you finish a couple of pieces that you know are going to go together. In this case, it was the two sections that joined together to make this bird's eye. So you begin to see how the little puzzle pieces are all going to fit together. Once you are done assembling your sections, it is time to cut them out. Many of the pieces in this pattern only have one piece of fabric, so that's just a matter of laying the ruler down on the mat and cutting along that straight edge. If you want to use a pair of scissors, what I would do is tape this down to the back side of your fabric and then trim it. With everything trimmed up, it's time to follow the instructions and start putting sections together. The first two I'm going to find in here are A and B, and I'm going to stitch those together. I usually glance at these right side up, and I look at the picture of the bird and make sure they look right before I stitch them together. And one other thing I'm going to be looking for is whether any of the colors need to match up with the other piece. If those two sections have a meeting place where they just have to line up. In the case of piece A and section B, they really don't have anything that matches, just the outside edges need to kind of be lined up correctly. I finger pressed these two sections open just so I could kind of take a look at piece C and see how I was going to be stitching piece A, B together with the C section. Once I've got that lined up and secured with my clip, I will stitch on the seam line. And here is our completed Unit 1, which is comprised of sections A, B, and C. I am going to continue following the directions on this pattern and put these sections together bit by bit until I complete this bird. I normally will press after I put two sections together, and I normally will tear apart any paper. I will get rid of any paper backing that is no longer necessary to match with another piece. This bird took me approximately 3 hours from start to finish to assemble. Thanks for joining me today for this fun foundation paper pieced bird. I hope to see you back very soon.